Thank you for joining this webinar in the OCCRL Pathways Collaborative Equity Partners Fund webinar series. This series features participants who share their projects and findings, as well as the impact of their work toward equity-centered practices and policies. Hosted by Dr. Raina Dyer-Barr, this webinar covers 3 case studies of community colleges that have taken intentional, explicit, and holistic steps to advance equity in access and student success.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone, and or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from today. My name is Raina Dyer-Barr, and I'm an assistant director with the Office of Community College Research and Leadership. I just want to welcome you to today's webinar, which is the first in a series that's being presented by our Pathways Collaborative partners who were awarded funding to conduct the work that they'll be describing today via our Equity Conscious Community College Pathways Grant, which was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Everyone has been muted and the videos are off except for the presenter, and that's just to reduce any sights or sounds that can be distracting. And so we'll ask that you remain that way throughout for the duration of the webinar. We'll use the chat box, which is you can find down below for our question and answer session at the end. And so during the presentation, if you have any questions, just drop them in the chat box, and then we'll get to as many as we can at the end. And we'll take them basically in the order that they are received. So without further ado, I will hand it over to today's presenters from the Aspen Institute and Achieving the Dream. And they'll introduce themselves and tell us about their work.
Great. Thank you, Raina. I want to thank you, Raina, and Ebony and the whole team at OCCRL for the support of this project and the support all the way through of getting this funding and being able to use it to develop some resources for the Pathways Collaborative and for the field. I'm really excited to see what the other teams have put together, and I think this has been a really great strategy to enhance the resources that we all have as Pathways partners and as reformers to center equity more intentionally and more explicitly in our work collectively. So thank you, Raina. Thanks for your support in putting together this webinar. My name is Keith Witham. I'm the Managing Director of the College Excellence Program at Aspen, and I'm joined by my wonderful colleagues at Achieving the Dream, Carol Lincoln and Susan Mayer. And we'll share with you a little bit about the work that we've been doing with some great support from a writer and thinker and leader in the field, Richard Kazis, to develop some case studies of institutional journeys towards equity, towards advancing equity in their broader student success agendas as part of comprehensive pathways, reform models, and efforts. And we'll talk a little bit about why we wanted to use these resources to develop case studies and how we intend to use them, and also how others on the webinar and in the field might be able to use these resources, as of course they will be publicly accessible. Let's see if I can figure out how to, there we go. Just again, as Raina said, with support from the Pathways Equity Partners Fund and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We set out at the beginning to develop case studies to support our joint mission. So Aspen and ATD have worked together for many years, and each of us has, as part of our missions, a core effort around training others to do this work, right? We're not the ones who are out implementing pathways, implementing equity strategies, but we as intermediary organizations support institutions by providing leadership development and providing coaching from ATD. And so a lot of our work involves training and helping institutional leaders and our folks. So for Aspen is, community college leaders, senior leaders, presidents, for ATD through the coaching model with the teams that are part of ATD's work. That you can explain that, Carol and Susan, to try to frame and understand what are the different dimensions and aspects of equity work, and how does it fit in comprehensively to comprehensive transformational efforts like Pathways. And we, I think, see commonly across our work at ATD and Aspen some challenges, some barriers not just for students, but barriers to institutions being able to really comprehensively address equity in all of its different dimensions. And so our goal with these case studies was to provide some really rich stories of how institutions have approached this, not to suggest that there are perfect examples of this, because we know that there aren't. No institution has achieved equity, a perfect equity and outcomes, but to show how institutions are going through this journey in the different ways that they're approaching it, so that through our different instructional efforts, we can promote the adoption of more comprehensive approaches to equity by helping our leaders, helping our teams understand the different aspects of what's involved in trying to make equity more explicit and more central in pathways reforms. Let me turn it over to Susan or Carol, my colleagues at ATD, if you want to talk a little bit about how your work and how you see these case studies as fitting into that.
So as I think you know, ATD has been, the work of ATD over the last 15 years has been rooted in evidence-based decision-making and equity at the heart of the work that we do. We currently have about 80 coaches who are deployed out into the field, supporting a network of almost 300 colleges. And ATD has also been charged with creating for the Pathways Collaborative training to bring on board another 100+ coaches who have Pathways training and also are able to facilitate difficult discussions around equity sense making. We started developing training for our coaches as well as the Pathway Collaborative coaches in equity several years ago. We enhanced that with some training from Sean Harper's Race and Equity Institute last year. And we see this work as a continuation of our ability to provide our coaches with the support they need to facilitate equity sense making in the field. We have long been supportive of disaggregating data that helps identify where equity gaps are. And we find the need for more support for coaches in helping facilitate the difficult discussions about what that data means, and more importantly, what actions to take as a result of that. I just got off a call before joining you with the coaches who are supporting our new cohort of colleges that get onboarded next week. And we were talking about what gives us hope coming out of the last several months, which have been in many ways hopeless. And consistently, our coaches were talking about the renewed momentum and the renewed energy to focus on equity, that we cannot, even with all of the health issues and the economic issues, we cannot stop focusing on student success, and we cannot stop on dismantling the barriers that prevent equitable outcomes for our students. So we're thrilled to have, as Keith said, some more course material that we can use to support our coaches, to support the Pathways Collaborative coaches, and to support others in the field who will be able to use this to understand that dismantling barriers is a journey. Our 3 colleges that are focused in these case studies have made some very significant progress, but they are not there. We looked at our network of colleges, roughly 300 colleges, and while they have made significant improvements in college completion, 3 percentage points across our entire network over the last couple of years, which is very significant. We all know how hard it is to move 4-year completion rates. The equity gaps are not closing as fast as they need to. And so we all need to be able to use course material like that, which has been created here, and that you're funding in the other 2 grants through the OCCRL funding to be able to support coaches and others to have a renewed focus on equity and equity sense making. So thanks again for the opportunity to develop these courses, these cases.
Great. So let's turn then to the cases, and Carol, maybe you can talk, or Carol and Susan, talk a little bit about first why we chose these 3 institutions out of the ATD network, and then we'll turn it over to Richard, who is our Richard Kazis, who's our case study author and interviewer, and he can share some of the key points from each institution that you'll see in the cases.
Thanks, Keith. I'm going to start with this. So we were beginning with trying to find colleges that were certainly showing upward trends on their student outcomes on a variety of metrics. And we were also looking for ones where they were at least narrowing the equity gaps if they had not yet closed equity gaps. We wanted to also find colleges that were not what we ended up calling the usual suspects. We felt like it was important to increase the knowledge base of institutions that were doing strong equity work beyond just the ones that maybe everybody has heard of already. So we were deliberately looking for some stories from some smaller institutions that don't often get this same kind of attention or notice. We particularly wanted to pull out a tribal college experience because they are noticeably missing from the literature on this topic, at least the way we talk about equity these days. And then a variety of institutions, different size, serving different student population groups, located in different places across the country. To find them, we started looking at the ATD colleges and also colleges that were in the Aspen Prize competition database. We started looking at the data to find which ones were showing the upward trends and which ones were showing equity gap closures. The leader colleges and leader colleges of distinction plus the Leah Meyer Austin Award winners from ATD were among the ones we looked at from the ATD side. And we also looked at the ones from Aspen, the Rising Stars, and some of the others that Aspen had found to be doing significant. What we ended up with was taking that data analysis, that look, plus our own knowledge of these institutions, and came up with these three because we think they do present a variety of stories, different journeys, different ways of looking at equity and even defining equity, so that we can have a rich collection of ways of thinking about this work and learning about it. The Fond du Lac story is the tribal college story. They are a unique institution in that they are also a community college in the state of Minnesota, and they are a tribal college. They had dual designation. We think of them as a tribal college primarily, but it's interesting that 23%, just about a quarter of their student populations, are Native Americans. So they're serving other students as well, notably some African-American students and many white students. They're the smallest of the three institutions with about 2,300 students. They also have a strong intercollegiate athletic program, which is a little bit different than the other institutions. Grayson became a choice. They are I'd say small to medium-sized institution in rural Texas. They're located in a very poor area of that state. They're about twice as big as Fond du Lac with about 4,600 students. They have about 2/3 of their student population are white. The others are persons of color. Pierce College may be the one that's better known by everybody because they've been in the Pathways Project. They've done a lot of good work over the years in some of the national initiatives. But we felt their story was pretty compelling because of the long-term emphasis they've had on equity and their pursuit of equity. They are an institution with 2 separate campuses. They have about 15,000 students, so they're considerably bigger than the other 2 institutions, have a lot of dual enrollment students, and are also serving a large number of veterans because they are located near a military base in that state. So I will stop there with that brief introduction of who they are, because Rich has been doing some great interviews and he's got the depth of knowledge of what distinguishes each of these institutions and also what are some of the commonalities of these institutions.
Thank you, Carol. So as Carol said, really different schools, difference in size, in history, in demographics. One commonality, and chosen for that reason, as Carol said, is that all 3 have made progress on student success in the past 3 to 6 years, although they've taken very different approaches to equity and different outcomes in terms of whether they've been able to reduce gaps and which gaps they've been able to reduce for which groups of students. Before I go into any detail, overall, I think one encouraging thing from each of these colleges is that they made a lot of progress on overall student success outcomes in a fairly short period of time. Now there's a run up to it, but you know, within 3 years, of serious work. Each of these colleges was able to make a dent in fall to fall retention, or fall to spring retention, fall to fall retention, course completions with 2 year better, those kinds of interim indicators, and also the ones who've been working a little longer, beginning to see real improvements in graduation rates. So that's encouraging. The challenge, as Carol and Susan said, is that the reducing the gaps is coming much slower, more uneven, and in pockets rather than broad institutional change in 2 out of these 3 colleges. But again, the last overarching comment is that the opportunity is great. That none of these colleges have had kind of the capacity and the will and the leadership and the team, only for, let's say, 3 to 5, 6 years in terms of really seriously being able to look at the gaps. And we'll get to this question of data in a minute, but having the capability to use their data well to understand where the gaps are and to begin to develop strategies, and the leadership and the kind of the ability to take what they see in terms of the gaps and start to develop strategies that are both, some of which are incremental and some of which are much more systemic. So there's a lot of room to move forward and a lot of opportunity at each of these schools. I just want to say a few things about each of them without going into too much detail. In the slide in front of you, you see the quotes, which I think capture kind of the approach to equity of each of the 3 colleges. Pierce College, they will tell you straight up front, we are about the relentless pursuit of equity. Everything they say in terms of the language they use is equity driven. Many of their choices about the structure of the way they have pursued their student success strategies are elevate diversity, equity, and inclusion. You see, they have a separate EDI council. They changed their 5 core themes to make equity one of the core themes. They hired a few years ago an equity, diversity, and inclusion officer, and a new one just a year and a half ago. They are, every conversation with faculty, with administrators at Pierce is with an equity lens. At the same time, Pierce has been able to make progress on a number of outcomes, like first year retention has gone up from 51 to 60% in 6 years, fall to winter retention up, 3-year graduation rate doubled, but they have not and so they are a case where you've lifted, all the boats are rising, but the actual gaps between African-American population, Hispanics, whites are pretty consistent to where they were a few years ago. So what's interesting is they have the language, and they have the consciousness, and they have the structures, and they have the professional development, and the adults all are on board, but they haven't yet come up with, I think, the strategies that can move the needle institution-wide in terms of reducing gaps. To be, to say something that is probably true of all 3 of these colleges, they are very concerned about improving the availability of data, not just, kind of disaggregating data and using it and making it available to faculty and to administrators in what they always talk of as the democratization of data. And to them, getting data into the hands of faculty and department and division folks so that they can use it and identify where are the weaknesses, where could they make some innovations. That's what Pierce is all about right now. So Pierce, definitely work in progress, but with an extreme equity consciousness and frame. Fond du Lac started as was a creation of the tribal, the Fond du Lac tribe on the reservation. Tribal council decided they needed to and wanted to create a community college. So it has its roots in the tribal council. as it says there, it's only 23% Native American, but only 23% Native American is the largest percentage in the state public system. In Minnesota, that's the largest percentage of Native American students in any of the public 2 and 4 year schools. But they will tell you, as the quote says, equity is our reason for being. We're all about equity. That's who we are. We're a tribal college. Now, they also have, as I think Carol said, because they have a strong athletic program, they also have a lot of African-American males and increasing number of smaller, but increasing number of Hispanic males and Native American athletes as well. And that has changed some of the dynamics in terms of how they think about the population as a whole. They're not just a tribal college, they're a community college for the region as well. So they've recognized a number of equity targets, including Native American males and African American males who consistently perform at lower levels than the student body as a whole, and then the Caucasian students. A couple of interesting things about Fond du Lac. They too had they're not a well-resourced college. So they have had to try to find low-cost ways of getting people started into thinking about equity and what are the strategies for reducing gaps, and building their data capacity, mostly through their involvement with Achieving the Dream, has been a major change. It's brought major changes to the way faculty think about their responsibilities, think about the different populations and who's succeeding and who's not. And a story that everyone there told me was they started, the first kind of successful intervention they had was to start using pencil and paper to track attendance in courses, and then have an early warning system that was fairly primitive, but built off of these attendance checks, because they realized they were losing so many students through falling behind and not completing, or not completing with a C or above. And so that for years was what they did, but they used it as a way to organize the faculty to start thinking about their responsibility beyond, a culture that was supportive of, kind of Native American values and things like that, but to move towards what are we actually doing with our students, for our students, to enable them to move forward. So that's a couple of things about Fond du Lac, and they have done. They have made some real improvements in terms of, for example, term-to-term retention of Native Americans who are in liberal arts program. That's the largest program at the college. They term-to-term retention has gone from 68 to 80% in a few years' time. And similarly, when they started a small, again, not very expensive strategy of reporting midterm grades that were below C level, or below C, they've been able to use the midterm grades to identify who needed more help and to provide that help, and to drop the number of D and F grades at the end of the semester from 23% to 13% in fairly short order. So we can take some questions about those two in a few minutes. And the last college is Grayson, and their quote is, "We meet students where they are." And what they're saying there is, yes, we are very conscious of equity gaps and which populations are not doing well in which programs and in which, and on what measures, but that's not what we lead with. In fact, our main concern is not main concern, but we are very focused on poverty in the region, on financial aid students, and the needs that they have. And we have both very targeted programs for, emergency aid and food banks, and a program called Grayson Cares, which is kind of knitting together all the different services so that low-income students can survive through the semester, stay on for the next year, have momentum, and succeed. But I think but they would tell you we don't really talk that much about equity. We talk about student success for all students, and they combine a pretty well-developed cycle of continuous improvement that enables the faculty to really grab hold of the things that they can control in their classroom, in their department, and continuous improvement that involves the faculty reporting to the leadership and the board, and really focusing every year on what can we do to tweak, to move things forward, to improve our outcomes for all students. And then they have a leader, a president who is not afraid of taking on big assignments and big changes. And one of the biggest changes they made was to shift, following Odessa College, to a 8-week semester just 2 years ago, which has helped them, helped improve retention, helped improve momentum into the next semester, and has changed. And because it requires all parts of the college to work together, figuring out financial aid, redoing financial aid, redoing advising, redoing how they think about pathways, that strategy, along with developmental ed redesign and the engagement in Texas Pathways programs, that college, Grayson, has, of these three, had the greatest success in narrowing gaps for Pell recipients, for African-American students, even though they are 70% white, but African-American gaps and Hispanic gaps have dramatically dropped, and some have disappeared totally in the past 3 to 4 years.
So I'm
Thanks,
going
Richard. We're running a little, yeah, go ahead, Susan.
Keith, go ahead, Keith, if you want to.
No, go ahead. I was just saying we're running a little short on time, but yeah, go ahead, Susan.
Okay, so I'm going to try and pull together what Carol and Richard just explained in some common themes and some takeaways that we've gotten from this. As Richard said in his description of the colleges, they're all still in process, with the exception of Grayson, that has actually been able to reduce not only reduce, but transpose the achievement gap. So in the case of African-American males at Grayson, African-American all students at Grayson, the equity gap has moved from a deficit to a positive. So four-year graduation rates are actually higher now for both Hispanic and Black men at men and women at Grayson than they are for white students. They took some bold actions, but interestingly enough, Grayson is the only college of the three where there was some legislative policy that impacted some of their strategic priorities. As you know, in Texas, there was a requirement that colleges move towards co-requisite education. So Texas, like California and Florida, has had some legislative policy decisions that, while many believed were draconian at the time that they were implemented, have actually had some very significant results in creating asset mindsets and creating reducing equity gaps. So I know John Fink is on the line. Some of the work that CCRC has done over the last year in looking at the completion of Gateway Math and English courses as predictors of longer-term retention can be seen in some of Grayson's numbers, for example. The students there are completing those courses at higher numbers, and you can see in the four-year completion numbers the impact of that. That bold work to change their approach to developmental education differentiates Grayson from the other two colleges that we looked at. But having said that, all of the colleges have certain conditions that are in place, or certain characteristics that are in place that we believe are responsible for the progress that they have made to date. And those are, there are about 4 or 5 of these. The first is a combination of top-down leadership and bottom-up innovation. So each one of these institutions had strong leaders who had used an organizational framework. So all 3 of them were ATD colleges. 2 of them were also Pathways colleges. The presidents understood the levers of change. They understood how to use those levers. They were not shy about communicating those levers, and they had an urgency to do this work. They had clear mission and priorities, but they also empowered faculty and staff at all levels of the organization to use the data to understand where the racial inequalities were and to engage in continuous improvement. So even in the case of Grayson, as Rich said, they talk about student success. They talked about student success until they realized that they were not reducing equity gaps. And then they made a concerted effort to develop an equity statement. And from that equity statement to share data, disaggregated data, much more broadly throughout the institution, to communicate that data and the urgency of closing those gaps. And in that period of time, over the last couple of years, they've made significant improvement in doing that. All of the three colleges, Pierce maybe even more than the other two, but all of the colleges have disaggregated data and used data to communicate and to advance the discussions about equity sense making. They've aligned their priorities and resources around reducing equity gaps, and they have held their teams accountable for progress, for lack of progress, and for continuous improvement. So they have, all three of them have built institutional capacity for not only transformational change and continuous improvement, but they built institutional capacity for attacking the racial inequities that exist in their organization and for continuing to make progress in reducing those gaps. So Keith, did you want to tie up?
Sure, thank you. I know we're past time, and for those of you that are still with us, I just wanted to quickly close out and say that these, we're still finalizing. We want to get these case studies back to the institutions to just fact check and member check, and then we'll get them designed and published on our websites and available for our use as well as those of other Pathways Collaborative partners and for the field. They will be available on each of our organization's websites with some instructional framing and some instructional guides, so questions that might prompt inquiry. So really these case studies will be not just the case study, but actual instructional tools. When we will let OCCRL folks know and Pathways Collaborative partners know when those are up officially on our websites and ready to use, we'll make sure to disseminate those. If you have any questions, I know we didn't have time to get to questions, but if you have any questions or follow-up or interested in learning more about these cases, definitely please reach out to me, to Susan. Her email is here. Carol, I'm sure, would also be open to talking with you. Her email is, I should have put here too, clincoln@achievingthedream.org. And I just want to quickly, again, thank everyone. And yeah, do I have a timeline? We're aiming for early August to get them designed, proofread, and up on the websites and out to the field. So I just want to really thank OCCRL again, and thank Richard Kazis for writing these, doing the hard work of interviewing, and really thank these three institutions for being willing to share with us their stories and in really candid ways, both what they've accomplished and what they still have yet to accomplish. So thanks, for any of you who know folks at these institutions or interactions with them, we're really grateful to their willingness to engage in this and be subjects of study for us and for the field. So thank you, Raina. I'll turn it back to you to close out, but thanks everyone.
Thank you. I saw a question that asked, would we receive a link to the presentation? We will be posting this recorded presentation on our website, so it will be available there.
Great. I can also send you, Raina, the PowerPoint for you to disseminate.
Thank you. And so we'll also have that PowerPoint as well. If there are no other questions, I just want to thank you for your presentation. This is excellent work, and it's very encouraging. And I am looking forward to reading the case studies and checking out the other materials as well. So thanks everyone for your time today and engaging with this work. And we hope you'll join us for our next webinar in the series, which is next week. It's on Wednesday, and you can register for it by visiting our website, occrl.illinois.edu, and just scrolling down to the events calendar at the very bottom of the page, and you'll see a registration link for our next webinar. So thanks everyone again for your participation today.
Great. Thanks, Raina.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining this Office of Community College Research and Leadership webinar, which was made possible through funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Please visit our website at occrl.illinois.edu to discover upcoming and past webinars focused on equity in education.